At 9:59 p.m. on Saturday night, the clerk in Judge Deborah Nelson's courtroom read the verdict that this country was very anxiously waiting for. 44 minutes later, Cord Jefferson posted an 1,100-word piece entitled, "The Zimmerman Jury Told Young Black Men What We Already Knew." If you're a black man and you don't remain vigilant of and obsequious to white people's panic in your presence, if you say, punch a man who is following you without cause in the dark with a handgun at his side, then you must be prepared to be arrested, be beaten, be shot through the heart and lung, and die on the way home to watch a basketball game with your family. And after you are dead, other blacks should be prepared for people to say you are a vicious thug who deserved it. You smoked weed, for instance, and got in some fights at school like I did. Obviously, you had it coming. You were a ticking time bomb, and sooner or later, someone was going to have to put you down. Joining me now, Reverend Al Sharpton and Joy Reid. Al, those words, I think, were not what I just read from that posting about how it felt to Cord Jefferson. Those words were not shocking to an African-American audience to read.
No, they're not shocking, unfortunately. And I think that what comes out of this trial, that and the verdict, is frightening to African Americans and others, because really what we're saying is that a civilian can now pursue a minor and use deadly force and really use self-defense according to Florida law, the Stand Your Ground law, which has implications, even though it wasn't used at trial. It certainly has implications in terms of how the defense statutes are, and it had implications on why Zimmerman was not arrested that night. So I think that the big picture here is that we've got to deal with these state laws, and the Justice Department must look into that, and we must look into the actual incident that happened. Another thing, Lawrence, that I think that you were very correct in bringing up in the first block is this whole question of what we're now hearing from the juror, where the juror is saying all of this 2 days after the verdict. Well, she has a book deal. When did the book company approach her? When no one's supposed to have known who the jurors were? How was she contacted? How do you cut a deal when we just went to business on Monday morning and no one was even supposed to know the jurors? Then you get down to the vote of the jurors. You get down to her husband being a lawyer in a very small community. Did her husband know Mark O'Mara? How did she get on the jury? And as Joy Reid pointed out, with her biases, why wasn't she struck from the jury? So there's a lot here that needs to be looked into and possibly investigated, even on the conduct of how the jurors were selected and who they were.
Joy Reid, I'm thinking about all the tears that we saw at Barack Obama's first inauguration in Washington. Indeed, the tears we saw at his first national exposure in the convention in 2004 in Boston. And some of those tears were about thinking about how far we'd come, how remarkable this is that we are inaugurating our first black president. And now this weekend we have painful tears, angry tears. And I'm wondering, how much did people think that we had left this kind of thing behind, and how much did that inauguration in 2008 and other big signs of progress that we've had, how much did that allow people to feel we had left this kind of possibility behind, that a black kid could get shot on his way home from just a trip to the 7-Eleven for no good reason?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think Barack Obama's election gave people a false sense of security about race. Barack Obama's election didn't signal that racism was over. It just was an opportunity to open the door and let it come out. We saw a lot of things come out in this country that people weren't prepared to view, and the ugliness of them. We saw a lot of it in the Tea Party, the president being called a liar in the well of the House of Representatives. And look, Lawrence, the truth is, in the ugly history of this country, it used to be that any civilian, any white civilian, could police the presence of any black person out on the street. Young, old, child, old man. They could ask you, what are you doing here? Make make you cross the street, find out what you're doing. In the case of Emmett Till, drag you off and lynch you just for looking at a white person wrong. Black people have been policed by civilian whites for a very long time. We thought that was behind us, and the primary concern that Reverend Sharpton and others have been looking at has been police profiling and saying, well, now police can look at you as suspect and can even in some cases shoot you because, oh, it looked like he went for his wallet, looked like he was going for his waistband. I thought maybe he had a gun. And so we've sort of trained ourselves to think that the current problem is profiling by police. Well, now we've gone all the way back to people policing you when they are not an authority, that a civilian can actually pursue you, question you. I've seen so many comments online about, well, why didn't Trayvon Martin just tell him who he was? Well, because this wasn't a cop and he didn't have any authority to ask him where he was. Neighborhood watch people are not police officers. They don't have any authority over any teenager. So the idea that people are saying, well, Trayvon was acting suspicious, you know, George was just doing his job to find out where he was going, this is setting us back in a way that is so ugly and so uncomfortable, and I'm glad that the country is being forced to look at it.
Well, I think also I might add that the question should be asked, why didn't Mr. Zimmerman tell Trayvon who he was? According to Zimmerman's statement, he never identified himself to Trayvon Martin as a member of the Watchmen's group or the captain of the Watchmen's patrol in that area. So a more pressing question is not why would Trayvon not say something to him about who he was or where he was going. Why, if you were doing what you considered a citizen duty as a volunteer watchman, why wouldn't you say, I'm a watchman, I'm trying to look out for safety in the neighborhood? Why, according to George Zimmerman's own tape statement, he said, no, I never told him who I was? Well, why wouldn't you? And then why, if you didn't, wouldn't the young man feel you were acting in a suspicious way, since he had every right to be there? He was not trespassing. He was going to his father's home where he was staying, and he was not committing a crime.
Joy, quickly before we go, I need to talk to you as a mother. I want you to talk about the conversation that black parents are having with their kids about this. I spoke to a friend of mine who has a nephew who is just a Trayvon Martin lookalike, a same age just about in high school, and she said she didn't want to talk to him about it now. She wants to wait for a while until this cools down because she doesn't want to make him more anxious right now.
Yeah, I mean, I have 3 kids, 2 of them are boys. I have a 16 and a 13-year-old boy, and I didn't want to talk to them about it either, but they talked to me about it and to their dad about it. They were up when I got home at about 2 o'clock in the morning on Saturday night watching it with their dad, and their dad had warned them that I was going to be extra huggy, and all I wanted to do was go home and hug them and kiss them because, you know, my kids who are so precious to me are so small to me and are children to me. The idea that someone would think my little beanpole 16-year-old was a threatening man, was Mr. Reed instead of the little boy that I know him to be, and would judge anything he'd ever tweeted or text to say, aha, there he is a thug, he deserved to die. You know, I've had the experience of making sure I knew what my kids are wearing every morning before they go to school, because God forbid anything happened to them, I want to know exactly what they had on because I need to be able to identify them. And I used to worry about police profiling my kids. For God's sakes, I don't even know what to tell my kids about how to fear every civilian because so many of them are carrying a gun and so many of them think that they're suspicious and assume them to be a criminal when they're just walking down the street. So we're still working at my house on what to tell my kids.
Reverend Al Sharpton, thank you very much for joining me on this important night of this discussion. And Joy Reid, a very special thanks to you. I know your very first appearance on this program was to discuss what was going on in Florida on the killing of Trayvon Martin, where no charges had yet been brought. You were crucial in helping me understand the case and helping this network understand, especially.
Thanks, Lawrence.
In the rewrite tonight, you will get my final thoughts about for this evening anyway, on this verdict. But first, the filibuster face-off here in Washington, Senator Mitch McConnell versus Harry Reid. It's coming down to the wire on whether they're going to use the nuclear option. Ezra Klein, Karen Finney will join me on that.